All right, so let's go ahead and start to look at InDesign at the next level. We're going to look at today. We're going to learn a few new tools. We're going to look at one called master pages. Okay, so we're going to look at how master pages work. We'll also learn some general organizational tools. We'll look at a little bit more about how layers work, and we're actually going to go back to that slide that we were looking at earlier, if I can find it. Let's see, we're going to look at that slide and how to create a nice orderly grid system using the golden ratio. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and actually work through this kind of step-by-step illustration and how to create this general kind of workflow. So this is a really good one for beginners. I definitely suggest, if you've never created a portfolio before, to start out with something like this. Either start out with like something like this, one of the other grid systems, but this is a nice beginner way on how to lay out a nice, orderly, well-composed graphic. Okay, so we'll kind of look at a handful of things today for InDesign. So we're going to click on Document, all right, and we're actually going to leave the button facing pages checked. Okay, when you're going through the exercise prompt, it's actually going to tell you to uncheck facing pages, but I'm actually going to look at, for today's demonstration, we're going to look at it a little bit more closely related to the portfolio, okay, as opposed to the exercise. So we're going to make this, what did I say, 6 by 8? I think it's 6 by 8. Or no, 4 by 6. 4 by 6. So we're going to make this 4 by 6 inches, the width being 4 inches and the height being 6 inches. And remember that if you just type in inches, it'll automatically convert it to picas. All right, I am going to change all of the margins over to 0. 0, okay, this looks good. I like that, that looks nice. And as soon as I'm done with that, I am going to hit OK. All right, and that will give us our first page. All right, if we click on the Pages button in the upper right-hand corner, that first page will be representational of, you know, the first page of a book. Okay, if I go and I add 2 pages to that, so I add pages 2 and 3, you'll notice that it creates 2 new pages as if it was the next 2 pages in a book. Okay, so that's what facing pages is going to get you. All right, so let's look at how we might create a layout similar to what we see here in that graphic. And let me pull that open again. Okay, so let's look at how we might create something like this. So we're going to go up here in our Pages button, and we are going to go up to where it says A Master. Everybody see that on their screen where it says A Master? Okay, so we're going to double click on this. We're going to double click on the A Master. All right, we're no longer working on sheet 1, 2, or 3. We are now working on a master page. What a master page is it allows you to create content that every time you create a new page, it will apply that content onto every sheet. So if you have a couple different elements that maybe are an underlying organizational element, or maybe you have a bunch of grid lines that you're going to use as your organizational element, the A Master is the place to place that, so that every time you create a new sheet, you're going to see those organizational elements. Okay, and I'll show you'll get a better idea on what that means as soon as we actually put some stuff on it. Let's change our units to inches. So I'm going to go up to my left-hand corner, and I'm going to right-click on that, change that to inches. Okay, so on the A Master slide, let's go over and let's click on our layers. Okay, so we talked a little bit about layers last class a little bit. Okay, we talked about how they're very similar to Photoshop in terms of how they stack and how they're organized. Okay, so the main difference being that you can have multiple objects inside of a single layer. Okay, so I am going to click on the New Layer button here, and I am going to call this, actually let's call layer 1. I'm going to double click on layer 1 so that I get my layer options dialog box, and I'm going to call this grid lines. Okay, I'm going to call this grid lines. You can make it whatever color you want, it doesn't really matter. And then from there, I am going to uncheck the box that says print layer. Okay, so I'm unchecking this box that says print layer so that everything, all the grid lines that I place on my sheet will not print. Okay, whereas everything that might be on layer 2 maybe layer 2 becomes background images, layer 3 becomes text. You'd want to make sure that the print layer box is checked. But everything that I'm going to place on my screen here in a few minutes, I don't want to print when I create a PDF. Okay, so I'm going to uncheck that print layer box and I'm going to hit OK. All right, an easy way to identify if your layer is a print layer or not, notice that the text between grid lines and layer 2, notice that that text is italicized. So that italicized text is a identification tool that everything that you're creating on that layer is a non-printing layer. So I'm going to call layer 2, double click on that. I'm going to call this maybe images. I'm going to keep it real simple. Images. I'm going to leave print layer checked. Okay. Maybe we create another one for text. Okay, and we'll hit OK. So I am going to go back to the grid lines layer, and I'm going to make sure I select that so that all of my line work that I start to create on here becomes a grid line, okay, or it becomes a non-printing layer. I could draw as much as I want on here, and if I go and create a PDF, I won't see it, okay? So let's look at our little graphic that we have over here. The first step that we're going to do, I'm actually I don't have my margins activated yet because we're actually going to essentially create them ourselves, okay? That's the slight difference between what we're doing. But I'm going to create these blue grid lines that we see here on step 1, okay? So I'm going to go over to my line tool that you see over here on the left-hand side. I'm going to click on my line tool, all right? And I'm going to start in the upper left-hand corner, and I am going to draw a line all the way down to the lower right-hand corner, okay? So lower right-hand corner. I'm going to do the exact same thing on the opposite side, all right? So I'm going to start over here in the bottom left-hand corner, and I'm actually going to reduce the size of my layers box here so that it doesn't interfere with my graphic, okay? So I'm going to draw a line from my lower left-hand corner to my upper right-hand corner. Okay, so what this is actually doing, this is probably not going to make any sense for the first couple steps, but as we start to create some lines and some intersections, we'll start to create a nice orderly system to our grid. Okay, so the next line that we're going to create is going to be from our upper left-hand corner to our middle of our page. Notice that this is a great example, is if you move your cursor to that bottom middle intersection, you'll notice how your cursor kind of snaps to that point. This is a point that InDesign likes. It's telling you that it's in the middle of the page and you're putting it in the right spot. Okay, my next point that I'm going to place is from the opposite corner also down to the middle. Okay, so those are just a couple of our initial shapes that we've created. So the next step is going to be to start to identify some of our top and our bottom margins. Okay, so I'm going to pick a point. I'm going to pick a point maybe at like 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so if you look over here on our ruler, it's going to be at about this area right here. And if you notice, as you move your mouse around your screen, you'll also notice that you see this little dashed line on both of your grids that tells you where you are relative to the rest of your page. Okay, so I'm going to place down a couple margins both on the top and the bottom of my sheet. And to do that, you could actually just draw a line like so if you wanted to. Okay, an alternative way to place down horizontal and vertical grid lines is if you move your cursor up to your ruler up here. Okay, so you move your cursor up to your ruler and you click and you drag down, notice that it gives you a grid line, okay, or gives you a reference line, okay? So, and if I keep dragging my cursor down, notice that if I'm on the left side of my sheet, that reference line is on the left side of my sheet. If I move my cursor to the right side, it moves it to the right side. If I move my cursor off the sheet altogether, I get a line that stretches through the entire layout. Okay, everyone see how that works? So I'm going to place that line at about 3/4 of an inch. Okay, now this is not necessarily a set rule. 3/4 of, it's not a key dimension. If you want to fill a little bit more content on your sheet, or maybe the look that you want is you want your images to kind of go closer to the edges of the page, you might make that dimension a little bit less. So ultimately it's up to you to figure that out, but I'm gonna go ahead and just use 3/4 of an inch. All right, so there's one horizontal grid. I'm gonna go ahead and drag another one down, and I'm gonna drop it at the same spot at the bottom of my sheet. All right, so those are our top and our bottom grid lines, okay? So our next step after we get that is we are actually going to duplicate those grid lines, okay? We're gonna duplicate that spacing of that grid 2 more times at the top. Okay, so 3/4 of an inch, I'm gonna go ahead and place one 3/4 of an inch right there, and 3/4 of an inch would be right there. Okay, so that gives us kind of a grouping, or kind of a group of space that we're going to end up using here in a second. Okay, so our next step is going to be establish our vertical lines. And to establish our vertical lines, we're actually going to create our first one at the first intersection of this line over here. Okay, so this line right here. So I'm actually going to move my cursor on the left-hand side, and I'm going to bring a line over, a reference line over. Actually, I'm going to bring it over to the second one. Sorry about that. Okay, notice that this second line actually intersects the first or both of these 2 diagonal lines. That's the one that we're looking for. Okay.
Getting the grid to go across both sides. When I pull the grid down.
So if you bring your cursor up to the top,
Right.
that's a horizontal line.
Right.
If you bring your cursor over to the left ruler,
It's only staying on one side of the page.
oh, so bring your,
Oh, I see. I have to do it on this side.
yep, so if you bring your cursor down onto the page, you're only going to get one side. If you bring it off of the spread, you'll get it all the way through. So the lines will run right off your sheet. Okay, so once we get to this spot, and if you want to do it on the other side too, that's okay as well. I'm going to put it right there at that intersection. Notice that that horizontal line actually crosses through both our 2 black lines. Okay, so that's going to be our second vertical organizational element that we're going to use. Okay, so now we come over to the golden ratio. Okay, remember we had that number 0.618. Well, if we take the distance from this line right here to the center of our paper, we're going to multiply that by 0.618. So if we go down, calculator, unfortunately I can't do that off the top of my head, but it looks like we have, let's see, a total of 3 inches. So we're going to do 3 inches times 0.618. Ah, shoot. Where's clear? Here we go. So 3 inches times 0.618. That's equal to 1.854. Okay, so from there, I am going to take a line, and I am going to start at that intersection that I've created right here, and I'm going to draw a line. Notice that it's given us the dimension, or it's given us the length. Okay, what was it? Calculator. 1.854. We'll just call it 1.85. That's close enough. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and draw a line from this point, and it's going to be 1.85. So 1.85, about right. That's close enough. Okay, so that's almost right on. It's like a 1/100th of an inch off. Okay, so now I'm going to draw another vertical line. I'm going to draw another vertical line over, and I'm going to place it at the end of that line that I just drew. All right, so I'm going to take that line over here, so I can get that same spacing. I just moved it over. Yep, so that it's now touching it, and I'm going to go ahead and drag another vertical line over to this area right here as well. Okay, so I can now delete that line. I can delete that first line that I created. Okay, and I now have some kind of basic little building blocks in terms of where I might start to place some of my different elements onto my screen. Okay, so earlier we were just talking about master pages. I want to kind of show you guys what that actually means. So if I go over to sheet 1, notice that I now see everything that I just created. I now see on my first page. If I go down to sheet 2 and 3, I have those same lines on sheet 2 and 3. If I continue to add more pages, sheet 4 and 5, I have those same elements on those sheets. Okay? If I go back up to my master, so let's just say you were using let's say you brought in your title block that you created earlier. Let's say you placed that title block, right here. You threw it across the bottom. You made it yellow, okay? Well, if I go over to sheets 2 and 3, you're gonna notice all of these elements on every single sheet. So if you have certain elements like grid lines or other things that are organizational elements, you can use your master sheets so that every time you create a new sheet, you don't necessarily have to copy and paste them on every single sheet. I think one of the first lectures I showed you guys the paste in place command. Well, that works well, but if you know you're going to have something like a 50-page spread and you're going to want to copy certain things over and over and over again, the master sheets are a great alternative to creating some of those organizational elements, okay? So I'm going to go back over I'm going to switch from my A master, I'm going to go over to sheets 2 and 3. So this will be our first, kind of our first sheet to what we'll just call our portfolio right now. All right, and so I think I showed you guys this tool. If you go over to View and you go over to Screen Mode and you change that to Preview, that will show you what your PDF will look like once you plot it. Notice that you see nothing on the screen. The reason why you see nothing on the screen is because everything that you've placed on your layout is all on a non-printing layer. Okay. Whereas if I was to change my layer to one of my other ones and start placing different elements on my screen, I would see that if I switch it over to preview. Okay, so I'm going to change that back from view. I'm going to change the view back over to, or the screen mode back to normal so that I could see my different organizational elements. Okay, and then from here I'm going to go back over to layers. I'm going to click on the layers tag and I'm going to place I'm going to click on the images layer, okay? Because now I'm going to go ahead and drop in some images, okay? And let's start out by taking a frame, okay? So I'm going to take a frame and I am going to go ahead and draw a square to fill up that first box, okay? So I got that first box. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste a second box. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste that second box and I'm going to place it just below the first one. Okay, I'm going to leave a little bit of a space and I'm going to go ahead and copy another one over and I will place it just below the other one. Control C, Control V. Fairly typical command. It's used for a lot of software. Okay, so Control C, Control V, that's copy and paste. Okay. So you can see here that I now have 3 of the exact same size images placed on top of each other. Okay? So if you wanted to create maybe a little bit of a space between them, you could do that. So maybe you take the first one, you break that grid just a little bit. Maybe we break it like 1/4 of an inch. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and once I've done that, notice I just broke that grid just a little bit. I am going to copy and paste it again to the very bottom. Okay, and I'll paste it again. And notice that when you bring that box in between these two elements, notice that your cursor automatically kind of locks it in place so that you have even spacing between the two frames. Okay, see these two little spaces symbol? That's telling me that the spacing between my frames is exactly the same between all 3. Okay?
Would you do that again?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I created my first 2. We have one on the top, one on the bottom. Okay, I reduced the size of it just slightly so that I could leave a little bit of a gap between my different images. So I go ahead and paste one more, and then as I bring it closer to in between the 2 frames, your cursor should allow it to kind of snap into place. So right now, the pink line is telling me that it's centered on the other 2, and the 2 little green dimension lines between the two is telling me that the distance is exactly the same between all 3 frames. Okay, everyone see how that kind of worked? All right, so from there I could start to fill in some of my content. So maybe actually I'm going to create a text box maybe up here spanning all of my frames. Okay, so maybe it's something like that. I'm going to type in, let's call this lecture series. Okay, so I'm going to say lecture series. I'm going to make my text a little bit bigger. Maybe it's like 30 cents. Yeah, maybe a little bit smaller. Maybe it's like 30. Okay, so I'm going to change this text size to 30. I'm going to make this a font that's not so, doesn't have quite too many serifs in it. So I'm going to choose something like a little bit more modern. Maybe we choose copper plate Gothic. Yeah, I like that. Okay, I'm going to make the font size a little bit smaller. Maybe it's like 25. Okay. From there, even though I have a couple little serifs, it's not really my favorite font. I'm actually going to drag it, and I'm going to let it maybe just rest right on top of my first frame that I created. Okay. From there, I can go in and start to fill in some of the content. So I'll select my first frame. I'll go to File, Place, and maybe I'm just going to bring in some. I'm going to bring in some images from one of our previous lectures. So I'm going to go over to, let's see, do I have some images there? I think I have some on the last one. Okay, some album cover imagery. Okay, so we'll place one right here. I'm going to go ahead and click on Fitting. This was a tool we learned a couple classes ago. I'm going to fill the content proportionally. Actually, no, let's fill the content, fill the frame proportionally. Okay, and then from there I can center it as I need to. I'm going to do the same thing. So ideally, these aren't going to be images from your album cover. If I'm doing a lecture series poster, these are probably going to be, images that relate to whoever it is that's lecturing. Okay. So for example, let's say, let's actually backtrack just a tiny bit. Let's download an image. Let's say one of our lecturers is Le Corbusier. He came back from the dead. He came back from the dead, and he was going to come lecture here at Oh Glorious DVC. Okay, so maybe this is one of your images right here. Okay, I can click on that frame, File, Place. Let's fill it up with Corbu. Okay, so maybe that's our first lecture series. Okay, I'm just going to fill up the other ones with just kind of random content. Maybe we have, I think I have an image of, who was on there, like Kenny Chesney or something like that. Maybe he's an architecture lecturer. Okay, so fitting, content, fill frame. Oh, sorry, not that one. Let's do fill frame. Here we go. And let's fill up our last one. File, place, fill up our frames. Okay, so those are our 3 lectures. 3 of them are actually country stars, but we'll pretend they're actually lecture series, or they're lectures here at DVC. Okay, so we have a couple images. This is the golden ratio, so this is going to represent the 0.618, and the content over here is going to represent the difference. Okay, so from there I might go over to my type tool. I'm going to add a little bit of content over here. Maybe it just spans a small portion of that. I'm going to change my text to maybe like size 10, maybe even smaller, size 8. And I'm going to use a fun little tool. Has anyone ever used the Latin? It's actually a good little tool here. Latin text. Let's do Latin text. Latin text generators. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go over back to my InDesign file, and I'm going to fill it in. File, paste. Okay. Do you know why people use Latin to fill in as kind of filler text?
It's not copywritten, right?
Yeah, it's not yes, it's not copywritten, and it actually flows very much just like English does. Even though you're not actually going to read it, but the way the letters and the words are put together, is very similar to English. Okay.
Matt,
Yes.
what if you don't? What if you don't have the text style block on top of that? Why aren't I seeing that?
Say that one more time.
Why aren't I seeing that choice of text styles up in the upper left?
Over here.
On the upper left.
You have to build your box first.
Oh, okay.
And one other thing that might help you guys that we looked at last class, if you go over to Essentials and you click down and you move down to Typography, you'll get a lot more tools that relate to typography, okay? So you might have a little bit of text about this lecture. You might have some text about this lecture. Okay, you might have some text about this lecture, okay? So just some ideas, not necessarily exactly how you have to perform this exercise, more just showing you guys how to use the different tools. Okay, I'm gonna then copy maybe we copy this content right here, or I'm gonna copy these guys, copy and paste it over to the other side. Okay, and I could start to fill in the rest of my content. Okay, some things to pay attention to is if you're starting to place little bits of text, you're probably going to want to start to create some hierarchy. Okay, so you guys can do that by, adding the next little layer. I probably added way too much text there, so let's delete that. So I might add another little text box. You could say Le Corbusier. Let's make this a little bit smaller so you guys can start to create a hierarchy amongst the different text that you guys are using. Any questions about any of the tools that I've talked about so far?
Where's the control? Like my text box is bigger than my text. How can I center it vertically?
You're probably going to want to go over to your. Actually, let me see your screen real quick. How to center it, like on the sheet?
No, within the text box.
Oh, within the text box.
Oh, it's like center online?
Let's see. There should be. Let's
You can
see.
get it
Let me
centered
find my.
from side to side, but it can't get it centered vertically.
Give me just 1 second. Let me pull up the. Let's see. I think I'd have to go over back to Essentials. I think so. I'm looking for my. Let's see. Window. There's actually a little tool for alignment. Let's see. I lost it off my workspace. Let me find it again. Should be under one of these. Let's see, story, hyperlink, stroke. Let me come back to that. I used to have I gotta find where I put that. But I'll show you. There's actually there's a little bar that should be under window. Shoot, there should be one that says align. Oh, there we go. So if you go under window and you go to object and layout, you can go over to align. Okay, so those are various different alignment tools.
Okay.
If you can try experimenting with some of those. Okay, and if you also double click on your text, you should get more alignment tools related to the text that will pop up in your toolbar at the very top. Okay, so if that doesn't help, I'll come back and help you in a sec. All right. So those are just a couple different ideas to how you might start to establish a grid, okay? You could also go to a more fundamental grid, just like your basic squares like we looked at in the lecture, okay? That's also a very easy way to do that. So earlier, someone asked, how can you start to create, frames that aren't your basic rectangles, squares, circles, shapes like that, okay? So I'm going to actually delete all of this content here for just a second. Okay, and let's look at how we might do that. So you guys have been creating frames using this tool right here, using the rectangular frame tool, ellipse frame tool, etc. Well, there's actually another one that becomes a very powerful tool, okay? And that's gonna be the pen tool. We actually focus on the pen tool a lot more when we go over to Illustrator, where it's probably the most powerful tool. But if you click on the pen tool, okay, so if you click on the pen tool, you can actually start to outline various different shapes. Okay, so let's say that I want to fill an image into this triangle right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on all the all the 3 corners of this triangle. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so I've now created this shape. So I can grab that shape, I can move it to wherever I want. Okay, so I take that shape, and with that shape selected, I can then go up to File, Place, and that shape that I created will act just like a frame. Okay, so maybe I want to put in this image right here, fitting, fit proportionally to frame. Okay, so you can start to fill in various different shapes with different graphics that you might have. Okay, so I'll do that one more time. Let me delete that frame. And I'm going to go back over to my pen tool. And let's say that my first shape is something like 1.
Are you holding shift or anything?
Nope, I'm just going to click my points. You could hit shift. If you hold down shift, you'll actually create straight lines. Okay, so if your goal or if your intent is to actually create straight lines, hold down shift and that'll automatically allow you to create perfectly straight lines. Okay, so let's say I want to make a kind of a unique shape here. Okay, so that's one. I'm going to create another one. Okay, maybe it's something, I'm just kind of making this up as I go. It's probably not going to be the prettiest thing right off the back, but we'll say that that's shape 2. Okay, and then this is going to end up leading to another really cool tool. Okay, so I'm just going to create a couple random shapes. This becomes my third one. Okay, and I'll do one more. Maybe it comes down here. All right, so these are our kind of our different shapes that we're working with. Okay, so if I click on any one of these, I can go to File, Place, and again, that will fill it up with any particular image. Okay, so fitting, fill frame proportionally, and that starts to fill it up. But let's say that you actually want to combine all these shapes. Maybe you want one image in all of the shapes. Okay, so you're actually leaving yourself maybe like a little gap between all of them. Okay, so I can then select all of the images. I'm holding down shift, selecting all of the shapes that I've just created, and then from there I am going to go up to, let's see, object. And then, let's see, you're going to go down to paths, and you're going to click on the button that says make compound paths. Okay, and what that's going to do is it's going to combine all of the shapes that you've created into one single shape. All right, from there, if I can go to File, Place, I can insert an image, and it will fill all of those shapes accordingly. Okay, again, I can go to fitting, fill frame proportionally. And if I double click on that image, it works just as if it was a rectangle or a circle or any other shape. Okay? Everyone see how that works? A more basic form of that might be if you were just doing rectangles. So maybe you're doing something like, maybe it's something, I'm just going to kind of make this up. Like this. I'm just going to go ahead and add in a few of these rectangles. Control paste, control paste, control paste. Okay, so I've placed 6 rectangles in there. Right now the spacing of them is awful. There's no rhyme or reason to why I have this bad spacing here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Align tool that I had just opened up. So as a refresher, if you go to Window and you go over to Object and Layout, you can click on Align. Okay, this will allow you to, this will help you organize some of the shapes and text boxes and frames that you might add to your layout. Okay, so I'm going to select all 6 of these rectangles, Okay, and let's look at which one of these align tools might work well. So this first one is a align to center. We also have align to the right edge. Okay, so let me go back. Sorry. We also have an align to the left edge. But what I'm actually more interested in, and I'll let you guys kind of play with those a little bit on your own time. I want to go down to the very bottom here where it says distribute objects. Okay, so how do we want to align these? Let's see what let's look at what some of these might do. Okay, let's start with this top one. Okay, that didn't do much. That actually is just aligning all of the top edges. So because they were all for the most part pretty aligned, but let me just scoot down. I'll scoot a few of these down and you'll see this be a little bit more apparent. So I'm going to click on all of these frames that I just created. And I now click on that box and notice that, oh shoot, it didn't do what I was hoping it was going to do. It should actually align, should have aligned all of the top edges. Okay, so that's align the centers. That's the bottom edges. Let's see, this one right here. Sorry, I wonder if I have actually something else selected that's not making this work right. Just one sec. Let's see, we have line to use spacing. Line center. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. I think I have something else selected that's not causing this to work right. But start to look at some of those alignment tools. I'm gonna grab your attention again in just a second once I figure out what's not working right on this. But that will help you guys start to align your grids to allow you to have really nice, perfect spacing. Okay.
What you did when you put all of your shapes together, you went to object, and then what was the next thing?
Yes. Here, I'll do it again here real quickly. Let me just get these back to a more orderly fashion. Okay, so I just saw my little, let's take all these, I'm going to place them in the center. Okay, so that's centered on my sheet. So with all of those frames selected, I can then go up to Object, Paths, Make Compound Path. Okay, and that becomes one object. And then from there, you can go and place your image inside. Okay? Oops. All right, any questions about that? Good. Why don't you guys go ahead and get started. We have about 40 minutes left to class or so. Today was a long lecture. Sorry, I wish you had more time, but it's an important one in terms of content and organization. Well, we're going to end up coming back to this several times, so if you missed anything, don't worry. We'll end up talking about it again, I promise. But this becomes really important in terms of kind of the overall organization of your portfolio. So there's a reason why it's the final project. We spend a lot of time on the portfolio. We'll spend a lot of time on the organization. We'll probably create multiple iterations of it, okay? So we'll go back and forth. We'll figure out what works and what doesn't. We'll have failures. We'll have successes. So go ahead and start working on the next assignment.